So this one's from The Story of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves from the Arabian Nights Entertainments, translated by Edward William Lane. Okay, that's long. I feel like I'm about to have hiccups. Dang, I don't have water over here. I'm gonna have to go get one soon. Ali Baba was surprised to see a well-lighted and spacious chamber. I don't know why it's like ... like first pauses. Filled with all sorts of provisions, rich bales of silks, embroideries, and valuable tissues, piled upon one another, gold and silver ingots in great heaps, and money in bags. The sight of all these riches made him suppose that this cave must have been occupied for ages by robbers who had succeeded one another. The story of oh, I just read that. I'm stupid. But anyways, that's the excerpt. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I'm really good at reading. That's why we're here. Yeah, okay. That's better. Whatever. I'll get it later. Okay. Farid stared at the dark until his eyes hurt, but Dustfinger did not return. Sometimes Farid thought he saw his scarred face among the low-growing branches. Sometimes he thought he heard his almost silent footsteps on the dead leaves, but he was always wrong. Farid was used to listening to the sounds of the night. He had spent endless hours doing so back in his other life when the world around him was not so green, but brown and yellow. Same, Farid. His eyes had often let him down, but he had always been able to rely on his ears. All the same, Farid listened in vain that night, the longest night of his life. Dustfinger didn't come back. When day began to dawn above the hills, Farid went to the two captives, gave them water, a little of the dry bread they still had left, and a few olives. "Come on, Farid, untie us," said Silvertongue as Farid put the bread in his mouth. "Dustfinger should have been back by now. You know he should have." What? Farid has Silvertongue still tied up, right? I forgot about that. Farid said nothing. He loved to hear Silvertongue's voice. It had lured him out of his old wretched life, but it seemed that Dustfinger didn't like it anymore. He didn't know why, and Dustfinger had told him to keep watch on the prisoners. He said nothing about untying them. "Look, you're a clever lad," said the woman, "so use your head for a moment, will you? Are you going to sit here until Capricorn's men come and find us? What a sight will be. A boy watching two captives who can't lift a finger to help him. They'll fall over laughing." What was she called again? Eleanor. Farid had difficulty remembering the name. It was awkward as a pebble on his tongue. It sounded like the name of an enchantress from a distant land. He thought her unnatural. She looked at him as a man might look, without timidity or fear, and her voice could be very loud and as angry as a lion's roar. "We have to get down to the village, Farid," said Silvertongue. "We must find out what's happened to Dustfinger and where my daughter is." Yes, the girl with the clear, bright eyes. Little pieces of sky fallen to the earth and caught in her dark lashes. Farid poked the ground with a stick. An ant was carrying a breadcrumb bigger than itself past his toes. "Perhaps he doesn't understand what we're saying," said Eleanor. Farid raised his head and cast her a glance of annoyance. "Yes, I do. I understand everything." And so he had, from the first moment, as if he had never heard any other language. He remembered the red church. Dustfinger had explained that it was a church, although Farid had never seen such a building before. He always remembered the man with the knife. There had been a great many such men in his old life. They loved their knives and did terrible things with them. "You'll run off if I untie you." Farid looked uncertainly at Silvertongue. "No, I won't. Do you think I'd leave my daughter down there with Basta and Capricorn?" Basta and Capricorn. Yes, those had been the names. The knife man and the man with the eyes as colorless as water. A robber, a murderer. Farid knew all about him. Dustfinger had told him a great deal as they sat together by the fire in the evening. They had exchanged stories, although both of them longed for one with a happy ending. I always lose my spot. Now the story was growing darker with each day that passed too. It'll be better if I go alone. Farid dug the stick so hard into the ground that it broke in his fingers. I'm used to slinking into strange villages, strange places, strange palaces and houses. It was my job in the old days, if you know what I mean. Silvertongue nodded. They always sent me, Farid went on. Who'd be afraid of a thin young boy? I could sniff around everywhere without arousing suspicion. When did the guards change? What was the best way of escape? When did the richest man in the village live? Where did the richest man in the village live? If all went well, they gave me enough to eat. If it didn't, they beat me like a dog. They? Asked Eleanor. The thieves, replied Farid. The two adults fell silent, and Dustfinger still wasn't back. Farid looked toward the village and saw the first rays of the sun rising above its rooftops. Very well, you may be right, said Silvertongue. You go down alone and find out what we need to know. But first untie us. If you don't, we won't be able to help you if they do catch you. And I don't fancy sitting here tied up like this when the first snake wriggles past. I'll be right back. I'm so annoying. I just need to go get a water. Oh, I got blue jays out eating my bird food. Cute. Oh my god, I almost forgot my water again. What's up, Lilac? Are people here? I don't see anybody. My chat closed. That eagle that was outside my stream the other day was like still running around outside. I guess it just lives around here. I'm always hearing it doing that screechy noise and stuff. Okay. I'm gonna sit on this one. Ooh. It doesn't look right. That's right. Same position as before, please. A kitten eating owl around me? What the fuck? No, what the fuck for real? Okay. You all ready? Where'd I go? They, asked Eleanor. The thieves, replied Farid. The two adults fell silent, and Dustfinger still wasn't back. Farid looked toward the village and saw the first rays of the sun rising above its rooftops. Very well, you may be right, said Silvertongue. You go down alone and find out what we need to know, but first untie us. If you don't, we won't be able to help you if they do catch you, and I don't fancy sitting here tied up like this when the first snake wriggles past. The woman looked as frightened as if she had already heard it rustling through the dead leaves, but Farid looked thoughtfully at Silvertongue's face, trying to decide whether his eyes could trust him as his ears already did. Finally, he stood up, without a word, took the knife Dustfinger had given him from his belt, and cut them both free. My God, I'm never letting anyone tie me up like that again, said Eleanor, rubbing her arms and legs. I feel as numb as a rag doll. How are you, Mortimer? Can you still feel your feet? Farid looked at her curiously. You don't look like his wife. Are you his mother? He asked, nodding in Silvertongue's direction. Eleanor's face came out in more red blotches than a toadstool. Good Lord above, no. What makes you think that? Do I really look so old? Glancing down at herself, she sighed. Yeah, I probably do. All the same, I'm not his mother. I'm not Maggie's mother either. In case that's your next question, my children were all made of paper and printer's ink, and that man, she said, pointing to the rooftops of Capricorn's village shining through the trees, that man down there destroyed a great many of them. Believe me, he'll regret it. I'll put y'all on here. Why is that in my head? What even is that? Rolling Stones? It's gonna bother me. Okay. Fairy looked at her doubtfully. He couldn't imagine Capricorn being afraid of a woman. Certainly not one who got out of breath when she climbed a hill and was scared of snakes. No, if the man with the pale eyes feared anything, it would be what most people feared. Death. And Eleanor didn't look as if she knew much about killing. Nor did Silvertongue. The girl. Ferret hesitated before asking, where is her mother? Silvertongue went over to the cold fireplace and took a piece of bread lying among the soot-blackened stones. She went away long ago, he said. Maggie was just 3. What about your own mother? Ferret shrugged his shoulders and looked up at the sky. It was as blue as if the night had never been. I'd better go now, he said, putting his knife away and picking up Dustfinger's backpack. Gwen was sleeping close to it, curled up between the roots of a tree. Ferret picked him up and put him in the pack. The marten sleepily protested, but Ferret tickled his head and strapped up the pack. Where are you taking that marten? Asked Eleanor in surprise. The smell of him could give you away. He may be useful, replied Ferret, pushing the tip of Gwen's bushy tail into the backpack too. He's clever. Cleverer than a dog or a camel, anyway. He understands what you say to him, and maybe he'll find Dustfinger. Ferret, Silvertongue was... There's like something hair on there. Silvertongue was searching his pockets and took out a piece of paper. I don't know if you'll be able to find out where they're keeping Maggie prisoner, he said, hastily scribbling something with the stump of a pencil. But if possible, can you try to see that she gets this note? Ferret took the piece of paper and looked at it. What does it say? He asked. Eleanor took the note from his hand. Heavens above, Mortimer, what's this? She asked. Silvertongue smiled. Maggie and I have often sent secret messages in this writing. She's much better at it than I am. Don't you recognize it? It comes from a book. We're not far away, it says. Don't worry, we'll soon get you out. Mo, Eleanor, and Ferret. Maggie will be able to read the message, but no one else will. Ah, murmured Eleanor, giving Ferret the note back. Yes, if it falls into the wrong hands, it's better that way. After all, perhaps some of those fire raisers can read. Ferret folded the note until it was about the size of a coin, then put it in his pants pocket. I'll be back when the sun is above those hills at the latest, he said, or if you're not, I'll come and look for you, Silvertongue ended the sentence. And so will I, of course, added Eleanor, looking fierce. Ferret did not think that was a good idea, but he didn't say so. He left going the same way that Dustfinger had gone the night before, disappearing as if the ghosts who lurked in the darkness had eaten him alive. What? Chapter 42, A Furry Face on the Windowsill. This excerpt is from Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. It's a poor sort of memory that only works backwards. That's it. Flatnose brought Meggie and Finoglio their breakfast, and this morning it was more than bread and a few olives. He put a basket of fruit on the table for them and a plate of small sweet cakes, but Meggie didn't at all like the smile he served up at the same time. "All for you, princess," he grunted, pinching her cheeks with his clumsy fingers to strengthen your little voice. "But there's been a lot of excitement since Basta told us about the execution. Well, like I always say, there has to be more to life than hanging up a few dead roosters and shooting cats." Meggie exchanged a glance with Finoglio. The old man was staring at Flatnose with an expression of disgust that suggested he couldn't believe such a creature had slipped from his pen. "Yes, to be sure, it's been a terribly long time since we had a nice execution," continued Flatnose, on his way back to the door. "It'd attract too much attention, they always said, and when someone really had to disappear, well, the word was to go carefully. Make it look like an accident. Is that any fun? You bet it isn't. Not like it used to be. A good execution with eating and drinking and dancing and music. That's the way to do it, in style. And so we will this time, just like we did back in the good old days." Finoglio took a sip of the black coffee that Flatnose had brought him and choked. "Don't you fancy that kind of thing, Grandpa?" Flatnose looked at him sneeringly. "Take my word for it. Capricorn's executions are something to remember." "Who do you think you're telling?" muttered Finoglio unhappily. At that moment, someone knocked on the door. Finoglio had left it ajar, and Darius the reader put his head around it. "Sorry," he breathed, looking at Flatnose as anxiously at a bird obliged to get close to a hungry cat. I'm to get the girl to read something aloud, Capricorn's orders." "Really? Well, let's just hope she reads something useful out of a book this time. Basta showed me the fairy. She doesn't even sprinkle any fairy dust, however hard you shake her." Flatnose looked at Meggie with a mixture of dislike and respect. Perhaps he thought she was some kind of a witch. "You want to come out again," he grunted, pushing past Darius. Darius nodded and stood there a moment before sitting down at the table with Meggie and Finoglio, looking embarrassed. He stared greedily at the fruit until Finoglio pushed the basket over to him. Tentatively, he took an apricot and put it into his mouth as if he thought he would never in his life taste anything so delicious again. Definitely the good old days. Fuck. Eminem. That shit cracks me up. I need some honey. Need some honey before I read. That would probably help. It's so bright back here. I don't feel like it's normally that bright. I don't know what's the deal, really. I don't have my compensation yet, but I can turn it down. No, it's kind of dark up here, though. It's down just a little. I don't know. We could both have very constructive debates. You think so? Where'd my necklace go? Oh, it's in there. Somewhere. Oh, this is my straw. I thought that was something, like, I had a dead battery. It looked red. I don't know. Ignore me. Tentatively, he took an apricot and put it into his mouth as if he thought he would never in his life taste anything so delicious again. "Good heavens, it's only an apricot," laughed Finoglio. "Not exactly a rare fruit." Fruit in these latitudes. Darius spat the apricot stone out into his hand, still looking awkwardly. They gave me nothing but dry bread, and they took my books away too, but I managed to hide some of them, and when the hunger got too bad, I looked at the pictures in them. The best picture was of apricots. I sometimes sat for hours just staring at the painted fruit with my mouth watering. Ever since then, I just can't control myself when I see apricots. Maggie took another apricot from the basket and put it into his hand. Did they often shut you up? She asked. The thin little man shrugged. Yes, whenever I didn't read something out of a book properly. He replied evasively. Well, that meant all the time, really. Then, when they finally gave up because they realized that my reading didn't exactly improve when they frightened me, on the contrary, take Flatnose, for instance. He lowered his voice, casting a nervous glance at the door. I read Flatnose out, while Bosta was standing behind me with his knife. Well, he raised his narrow shoulders regretfully. Maggie looked at him sympathetically. Then she asked hesitantly, Okay. There's too many Lees going on here. Did you ever read any women out of that story? Finoglio looked at her uneasily. Certainly, Darius replied. I read Mortola out of the book. She says I made her older and as rickety as a chair cobbled together badly. But I really don't think I got much wrong with her. Luckily, Capricorn agreed. It's not just me, right? There was like a lot of illies like in this group of sentences, right? Any younger women? Maggie was looking at neither Darius nor Finoglio. Oh yes, Darius sighed. On the same day as I read Mortola out, I remember it very well. Capricorn was living up in the north then, at a lonely, half-ruined farm in the mountains, and there weren't many local girls around. I myself was living not far away in my sister's house. I worked as a teacher, but in my free time, I read aloud now and then in libraries and schools or for children's parties, and sometimes on warm summer evenings, I even read in a square or a cafe. I loved reading aloud. His gaze wandered to the window as if he could catch a glimpse of those long-forgotten happier days. I think Boston noticed me when I was reading aloud at a party in a village, a passage from Dr. Dolittle, and all of a sudden there was a bird flying around. I really didn't know I had the gift. Perhaps it was something to do with Bosta being there. Anyway, when I went home, Bosta caught me as if I were a stray dog and took me to Capricorn. First, he made me read gold out of books, like your father did, he said, smiling sadly at Maggie, but then I had to read Mortola out for him, and after that he told me to read his maidservants out too. It was terrible. Darius pushed his glasses up on his nose with trembling fingers. I was so scared. How can you read aloud well when you're terrified? He made me try 3 times. Oh, I felt so sorry for them. I don't want to talk about it. He buried his face in his hands, which were as bony as an old man's. Maggie thought she heard him sob, and for a moment she hesitated to ask her next question, but then she did. The maid they call Risa, she said, her heart beating in her mouth. Was she one of them? Darius took his hands away from his face. Yes, she came out quite by chance, he said huskily. Capricorn had really wanted another of them, but suddenly there was Risa, and at first I thought I'd gotten it right for once. She looked so beautiful, almost improbably beautiful, with her golden hair and her sad eyes. But then we realized she couldn't speak. Well, that didn't bother Capricorn. In fact, I think he liked it. He searched his pants pockets and brought a crumpled handkerchief. I really could read better once, he said, sniffing. But this constant fear. May I? With a sad smile, he took another apricot and bit into it. Then he wiped the juice from his mouth with his sleeve, cleared his throat, and gazed straight at Maggie. His eyes looked curiously large behind the thick lenses of his glasses. At the festivities that Capricorn's planning, he said, lowering his gaze and running his finger awkwardly along the edge of the table, the idea, as you probably know, is for you to read from Inkheart. The book's being kept in a secret place, and until that time comes, only Capricorn knows where it is. So you won't see it before the occasion. Which means that we're to use another book for the latest test Capricorn wants of your talents. Luckily, there are a few other books in the village. Not many, but anyway, I've been told to choose something suitable. He raised his head again and gave a slight smile. Fortunately, I didn't have to look for gold and such treasures this time. All Capricorn wants is proof of your skill, and so, he said, pushing a small book over the table. So I choose this one. Maggie bent over the cover. Collected Fairy Tales of Hans Christian Andersen. She read aloud. She looked at Darius. They're beautiful stories. Yes, he breathed. Sad, but very, very beautiful. I need my inhaler. I feel like I'm getting lightheaded from talking so much. How many do we have left in this chapter? This might be the only thing we get to is the end of this chapter, and then I quit, because it's a pretty long chapter. So, I don't know how y'all feel about that, but... You guys hear that? Crazy bass. Is this just too bright, or like, why is it so bright back there? I don't understand. It's not normally. It's not even like sunny or anything. I hate it. It's bothering me. I'm gutted. Getting close. I know we are. I'll put exposure at -3. If it looks really dark and weird now, like, let me know. Okay, let's breathe. Sad, but very, very beautiful. Reaching over the table, he opened the book for Maggie at a place that he had marked with a couple of long blades and a grass slipped between the yellow pages. First, I thought of my favorite story, the one about the nightingale. Maybe you know it? Maggie nodded. But the fairy you read out of the book yesterday isn't happy in the jug where Basta has put her, Darius went on. So I thought it might be better if you tried the tin soldier. The tin soldier. Maggie did not reply at once. The brave tin soldier in his little paper boat. She imagined him suddenly appearing beside the fruit basket. No, she said. No, I've told Capricorn already. I won't read anything out of a book for him, not even as a test. Tell him I can't do it anymore. Just tell him I tried and nothing came out of the story. Darius gave her a sympathetic look. Oh, I would, he said quietly. Really, I would, but it's the magpie, he said, quickly putting his hand to his mouth, as if he had said too much. Sorry, I mean the housekeeper, of course. Signora Mortola. It's her you have to read aloud to. I've only chosen the story. The magpie. An image of her flashed into Maggie's mind. She thought, very hard. She had done this a few times by mistake, and once her tongue had swelled up so much that she had to talk to Mo in sign language for 2 days. What? I missed a whole line, and it totally threw us off. The magpie. An image of her flashed into Maggie's mind, watching her with bird-like eyes. Suppose I bite my tongue, she thought. Very hard. She had done that a few times by mistake, and once her tongue had swelled up so much that she had to talk to Mo in sign language for 2 days. She looked at Finoglio for help. Do it, he said to her surprise. Read aloud to the old woman, but make it a condition that you can keep... the tin soldier. Tell her anything you like. Say you want to play with him because you're bored to death. And then ask for something else. Some sheets of paper and a pencil. Say you want to draw pictures, understand? If she agrees, we'll take it from there. Maggie didn't understand a word of this, but before she could ask Finoglio what he was planning, the door opened. And there was the magpie herself. Darius leaped to his feet so quickly at the sight of her that he pushed Maggie's plate off the table. Oh, I'm sorry, so sorry, he stammered, picking up the broken pieces in his bony fingers. He cut his thumb so deeply on the last piece that blood dripped to the wooden floorboards. Get up, you fool, snapped Mortola. Have you shown her what she's to read from? Darius nodded and looked unhappily at his bleeding thumb. Then get out. You can help the women in the kitchen. There are chickens to be plucked. Darius made a face, looking disgusted, but he bowed and disappeared into the corridor, not without casting Maggie a sympathetic glance. Okay, said the magpie, waving to her impatiently. Start reading and put your mind to it. Maggie read the tin soldier out of the story. It was as if he simply fell from the ceiling. He dropped down 3 stories to the street, and his bayonet stuck in the earth between 2 cobblestones. The magpie reached for him before Maggie could and stared at him as if he was just a painted toy, while he looked back at her with horror in his eyes. Then she put him in the pocket of her coarse knit woolen jacket. "Please can I have him?" stammered Maggie, just as the magpie reached the doorway. Finoglio placed himself behind her as if to cover her back, but the magpie just looked at Maggie with her sharp nose glazed. I mean, there's nothing you'd want to do with him," Maggie went on uncertainly, "and I'm so bored. Please." The magpie looked at her unmoved. "You can have him back when Capricorn has seen him," she said, and then she was gone. "The paper," cried Finoglio. "You forgot to ask for the paper and pencil." "I'm sorry," murmured Maggie. She hadn't forgotten. It was just that she didn't dare ask the magpie for anything else. "Ah, well, I'll just have to get it by other means," said Finoglio. "The only question is, how?" Maggie went over to the window, rested her forehead on the pane, and looked down at the garden, where a couple of Capricorn's maids were busy tying up tomato plants. What would Mo say, she wondered, if he knew I could do it, too? "Who did you read out to, Maggie? Poor Tinkerbell and the steadfast tin soldier?" "Yes," murmured Maggie, tracing an invisible M on the pane with her finger. "Poor fairy, poor tin soldier, poor Dustfinger." And she thought again of the woman with the dark blonde hair. "Risa," she whispered. "Teresa." Teresa was her mother's name. She was about to turn away from the window when out of the corner of her eye she saw something appearing above the sill outside. A small furry face. Maggie retreated in alarm. "Do rats climb walls?" "Yes, but this wasn't a rat. That animal's muzzle wasn't pointed enough." She quickly ran back to the window pane. "Gwen." The marten was sitting on the narrow sill, looking at her with sleepy eyes. "Basta," muttered Finoglio behind her. "Yes, Basta will get me the paper. That's a good idea." Maggie opened the window very slowly, so that Gwen wouldn't take fright and perhaps fall off the sill. Even a marten would break all his bones if he fell into the paved yard from this height. She put out her hand, still very slowly. Her fingers trembled as she stroked Gwen's back, then she grabbed him before his little teeth could snap at her and quickly lifted him into the room. She looked anxiously down, but none of the maids had noticed anything. They were all bending over the vegetable patch, their clothes drenched with perspiration from the heat of the sun burning down on their backs. There was a note under Gwen's collar. It was dirty and had been folded very small and tied in a place with a piece of tape. "Why are you opening the window? The air outside is even hotter than in here." Finoglio broke off and stared in amazement at the animal in Maggie's arms. She quickly put a warning finger to her lips. Then, holding the struggling Gwen tight, she removed the note from under his collar. The marten chattered crossly and snapped at her finger again. He didn't like being held too long, and would even bite Dustfinger if he tried it. "What have you got there, a rat?" Finoglio came closer. Maggie let go of the marten, and Gwen immediately leaped back to the windowsill. "A marten?" cried the astonished Finoglio. "Where did that come from?" Maggie looked anxiously at the door, but obviously the guard outside heard nothing. Finoglio pressed his hand to his mouth and looked again at Gwen in such amazement that Maggie almost laughed. "He's got horns," he whispered. "Of course, that's the way you wrote him," she whispered back. Gwen was still sitting in the windowsill, blinking uncomfortably at the sun. He didn't like bright light and preferred to sleep through the day. "So how had he got here?" Maggie put her head out the window, but there were still only maids down in the yard. Hastily, she moved back into the room and unfolded the note. "A message?" Finoglio leaned over her shoulder. "Is it from your father?" Maggie nodded. She had recognized the writing at once, although it wasn't as steady as usual. Her heart began dancing inside her. She traced the letters with her eyes as longingly as if they were a path with Mo waiting for her at the end of it. "What on earth does it say? I can't make out a word of it," whispered Finoglio. Maggie smiled. "It's Elvish writing," she whispered. Mo and I have been using it as our secret writing ever since I read Lord of the Rings. But he's probably rather out of practice. He's made quite a lot of mistakes." "Well, what does it say?" Maggie read it to him. "Farid, who's he?" "A boy. Mo read him out of the 1001 Nights. But that's another story. You saw him. When Dustfinger ran away from you, Farid was with him." Maggie folded the note up again and looked out the window once more. One of the maids had straightened up. She was brushing the earth off her hands and looking up at the high wall as if she dreamed of flying away over it. God, we're almost done with this. Anyone for a pickle? Ah! Okay. I think a command hook just fell. Y'all know that sound. It's pretty universal. There are only 280 pages left. How do you know? I don't even know that. How do you know that? That is the proper response in such a situation. I thought so. Okay. Who had brought Gwen here? Mo, or had the Martin found his way by himself? That was most unlikely. He certainly wouldn't be wandering around in broad daylight unless someone else had a hand in it. Maggie hid the note in the sleeve of her dress. Gwen was still sitting on the windowsill. Sleepily, he stretched his neck and sniffed at the wall outside. Perhaps he could smell the pigeons who sometimes settled outside the window. Feed him some bread so he won't run away, Maggie whispered to Finoglio, and then he went over to the bed and got down her backpack. Where was that pencil? She was sure she had a pencil. Yes, there it was, although it was only a small stump. Now what about paper? She took one of Darius's books out from under the mattress and carefully tore out one of the end papers. She had never done such a thing before. Imagine tearing a page out of a book, but now she had to. Kneeling on the floor, she began to write in the same curly script that Mo had used for his message. She knew the letters by heart. We're all right, and I can do it too, Mo. I read Tinkerbell out of her book, and when it gets dark tomorrow, Capricorn wants me to bring the shadow out of Inkheart to come and kill Dustfinger. She didn't mention Risa. Not a word to show that she had thought she had seen her mother. And if Capricorn had his way, that she too had only 2 days left to live. A message like that wouldn't fit on a piece of paper, no matter how large it was. Gwen was greedily nibbling the bread Finoglio had given him. Maggie folded up the end paper and tied it to his collar. Take care, she whispered to Gwen, and then threw the rest of the bread down into Capricorn's yard. The Martin scurried down the wall of the house as if it were the easiest thing in the world. One of the maids screamed as he scampered between her legs and called out to the others. She was probably alarmed for Capricorn's chickens, but Gwen had already disappeared over the wall. Good, excellent. So your father's here, Finoglio whispered to Maggie, standing beside her by the open window. Somewhere out there. Very good indeed, and you'll get the tin soldier back. Who was it who said it's all for the best in the best of all possible worlds? What? Who was it who said that all's for the best in this best of all possible worlds? I read it right, I just don't know what the fuck it means. He rubbed the tip of his nose and blinked out at the dazzling sunlight. So the next thing to do, he murmured, is to play on Basta's superstitions. What a good thing I gave him that little weakness. It was a clever move. Maggie had no idea what he was talking about, but that didn't matter to her. She had only one thought in her head. Mo was here. Oh! You guys want to see, this is the little, like, sometimes it gives you tiny little, like, ink pictures at the end of chapters. But there's the Martin. That's what Gwen looks like.